ultimatum for Russia. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson issues a strong warning for Moscow. Border visit.
Here, along our nation's southwest border, is ground zero in the fight.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions surveys the rough terrain along the border in Nogales, Arizona. Shepherd saints. 2 children who the Virgin Mary appeared to in Fatima could be on the road to sainthood. Papal visit.
Pensano che fosse il medico per fare il vaccino, no?
The Holy Father greets children in a Catholic hospital in Rome, and they have a message for him. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, April 11th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. It's nice to be back with you. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The Secretary of Defense speaks out for the first time since the U.S. launched a missile strike against Syria. He blames the country for a chemical attack on its own people.
I have personally reviewed the intelligence, and there is no doubt the Syrian regime is responsible for the decision to attack and for the attack itself.
Mattis says the main mission in the region has not changed. He says the U.S. military is still focused on ISIS and has the terror group in its crosshairs. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is in Moscow with an ultimatum for Russia. Side with the United States on Syria or embrace Iran and the embattled Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee is at the White House with more on Secretary Tillerson's visit. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Rex Tillerson is in Moscow to meet with Russian officials about the civil war in Syria. It's the first official trip to Russia by a member of President Trump's cabinet. It's unclear if President Vladimir Putin and Tillerson will meet, but so far, Secretary Tillerson is issuing a warning to Russia.
Russia has really aligned itself with the Assad regime, the Iranians, and Hezbollah. Is that a long-term alliance that serves Russia's interest?
As America's top diplomat arrives in Moscow, the White House says Russia is trying to cover up a chemical attack in Syria that killed nearly 90 people. President Vladimir Putin is not backing down and is calling for the UN to investigate. But Tillerson says the U.S. cannot let another attack happen again and is demanding that Russia reconsider its alliance with Syria and Iran.
Russia can be a part of that future and play an important role, or Russia can maintain its alliance with this group, which we believe is not going to serve Russia's interest longer term.
John Glazer, a Middle East policy expert, says the Syria strike could have negative consequences.
There's a higher risk of inadvertent escalation or some accident happening, which would really put us in a bad spot with a nuclear power like Russia.
His advice for the Trump administration is to devise a clear strategy for Syria.
There's all kinds of contradictory messages out there, and that's not good for allies of ours, that's not good for adversaries of ours. They need clarity on what our purpose is and what our policy is.
Critics accuse President Trump of having a cozy relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The White House's decision to strike Syria last week appears to contradict that notion. In terms of Syria, Secretary Tillerson has not clearly laid out the next steps for the U.S. Lauren?
What's the White House saying today about Russia?
Well, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer today expressed more concern that Russia is becoming more and more isolated. He says Russia's sort of on an island when it comes to supporting Syria. Spicer also compared Syrian President Bashar Assad to Adolf Hitler as it relates to chemical attack last week. Lauren?
I was watching that briefing, and that question was asked again. It didn't seem like he had a response. Thank you, Wyatt. Attorney General Jeff Sessions lays out a get tough strategy on immigration. He just announced new policies during his tour of the U.S.-Mexico border. Jason Calvi joins us in studio with a look at proposed changes. Jason.
Lauren, Sessions calls this a new era for immigration enforcement. He's also crediting the president for a steep drop in people crossing the border illegally. For the first time, we get a comprehensive look at the Attorney General's plans for prosecuting those in the country illegally.
This is the Trump era. The lawlessness, the abdication of duty to enforce our laws, and the catch and release policies of the past are over.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions lays down the law.
From January to February of this year, illegal crossings dropped by 40%, which was an unprecedented drop.
He proposes new, tough-on-immigration policies as he tours the U.S.-Mexico border, roughly 70 miles south of Tucson, Arizona.
It's also here, along this border, that transnational gangs like MS-13 and international cartels flood our country with drugs and leave death and violence in their wake.
So Sessions urges federal prosecutors to target smugglers, people who cross the border illegally, and those that come back after being deported.
The transportation and harboring of aliens. This is a booming business. No more. We're going to shut down and jail those who've been profiting from this lawlessness.
He's also ramping up the number of immigration judges. The Catholic Legal Immigration Network says Catholic charities across the country have seen a flood of immigrants seeking legal help.
Access to counsel really matters in immigration proceedings because a very large number of people who are in the system actually under the law qualify to remain in the United States. When people have representation in immigration court, they are so much more likely to win their cases.
The American Immigration Lawyers Association says the Attorney General and President Trump are scaring the public by linking immigrants to criminals. However, Pew Research found half of federal arrests in 2014 were for immigration-related crimes, including crossing the border illegally and human smuggling. A decade earlier, immigration-related crimes made up only 28% of all federal arrests. Lauren?
Thank you, Jason. And now it's 50%. Joining us now is political commentator Israel Ortega from the website Opportunity Lives. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Let me ask you. We hear the Attorney General pounding his fist saying this is the way it's going to be. This is the new get tough policy. Is it the right approach?
Well, I mean, for too long we've ignored our immigration laws. We haven't enforced our immigration laws, and so I think what Attorney General Sessions and President Trump are saying is, look, this is a new era. We're going to enforce our immigration laws now. That doesn't mean that we can't look at our immigration laws to see if there are some things we can do to fix them, including figuring out ways for people to come here the right way, which I think is one of the big problems that I see in the approach of the Trump administration.
Well, what can we expect from this new crackdown?
Well, I think what we're going to see is particularly the courts are going to be taking on more immigration cases. We're seeing that Attorney General, in conjunction with the Homeland Security General Kelly, will ramp up more arrests. And so I think the big question for me will see how will Congress respond to this, because I think a lot of the funding questions will also have to be dealt with in Congress.
You say that rather than building a wall, that the U.S. needs to support economic development in Mexico to reduce immigration here in the U.S. But hasn't the U.S. been investing in Mexico for years?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's one piece of many pieces I think that are required in terms of fixing our broken immigration system. But clearly, I think that by simply creating a physical border wall, that doesn't get at the root of what is driving a lot of people to come here in the first place, which is crime, violence, and also a lack of economic opportunity. And so to your question, I think
in their country.
In their country. Mm-hmm. One of the things we can do is I think we have to be open to trade. And that's what worries me a little bit about this president, that he's closing ourselves up to trading with Mexico. That would help Mexico create jobs for Mexicans in Mexico.
You wrote an article about 2 months ago, and you said you have some 5 ideas to talk about effective and humane way to control the influx of immigrants. Give us a little synopsis.
Yeah,
of that.
and I think part of what I was saying and part of what I'm hearing from the White House too is that they're understanding that we can't just physically create a border wall across the border. If we have infrared sensors, that would work well.
So using technology.
So using technology, that's right. In some cases, actually having a physical wall is not going to get it.
You also said reforming the visa system,
that's
enacting a guest worker program.
That's right. 40% of all undocumented immigrants overstay their visa, and so that goes to show you that again, building a physical wall won't get to that.
Pope Francis has emphasized that while we have the right to secure our borders, we also have to accept those who seek refuge. How do you think we balance that?
Mm-hmm. I think we could do more, and I think that clearly, as a sovereign country, we can protect and know who's coming in, who's coming out. But we certainly can do more to welcome people. And I think that we're going to be tested, obviously, in the Syrian refugees, but also what's happening in Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador. I think there's certainly more we can do to bring people into this country.
Thank you so much, Israel Ortega, senior writer for Opportunity Lives.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Alabama suddenly has a new governor after Robert Bentley resigns. Kay Ivey was just sworn in, becoming the second woman to hold the state's top job. The former lieutenant governor took over after Bentley was charged with campaign finance violations. He was booked into jail yesterday and pleaded guilty as part of a plea deal. His resignation ended plans to impeach him, all stemming from an alleged affair. Today's special election in Kansas is seen as the first test for Republicans since President Trump took office. Republican Ron Estes, a Democrat, and James Thompson are both running for the seat vacated by CIA Director Mike Pompeo. Republicans have held the House district for decades, but this election is surprisingly competitive, possibly showing signs of backlash against the GOP. President Trump, Vice President Pence, and Senator Ted Cruz have all lent their support to the Republican candidate, trying to help him win. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. A Franciscan brother is murdered during a burglary at his office in Venezuela. Brother Diego Bedoya, a member of the White Cross Franciscan Brothers, worked in Venezuela for more than 15 years. He was stabbed. He operated a home which cares for elderly people and disabled children. No one has been arrested in connection to the murder. The suspects stole food and other items from the home. Churches in southern Egypt will not be holding Easter celebrations this Sunday. This is following twin bombings in two cities during Palm Sunday ceremonies. The Minya Coptic Orthodox Diocese says celebrations will be limited to liturgical prayers without any festivities. The area has the highest Coptic Christian population in Egypt. They're still mourning Sunday's bombings, which killed 45 people. ISIS has vowed to step up its attacks against Egypt's embattled Christian minority. Despite many challenges, Christian communities in Iraq are showing signs of vibrance. We visited the Christian town of Tel Askaf in northern Iraq this past weekend, and I attended Mass on Palm Sunday, which you're seeing right here, with the local community. They speak Aramaic, the language Christ spoke. ISIS controlled the town for 2 weeks in 2016, but was driven out at the end of last year. And now the local Catholic community is struggling to rebuild. We'll have special reports on our visit to Iraq in the weeks to come, including a closer look at Christian persecution. The Vatican makes plans next Thursday to approve the canonization of 37 new saints. That could include 2 of 3 Fatima visionaries. Pope Francis will travel to Fatima next month to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the first apparition of the Virgin Mary to 3 shepherd children in the remote village of Fatima in Portugal. Speculation has been swirling for months that Francis will likely use the occasion to canonize 2 of the children, Francisco and Jacinta Marto, brother and sister, who were beatified by Pope John Paul II in the year 2000. Elise Harris just returned from a trip to Fatima. She's the Rome correspondent for our sister organization, Catholic News Agency. Elise, the consistory, the body that considers sainthood, is going to be held next Thursday. Can we assume then that the canonizations of the 2 Fatima visionaries will take place when the Pope visits there next month?
You know, I think there's been a lot of speculation that that's going to be the case, and a lot of people are hoping for it. We won't know for sure until that consistory vote comes in on April 20th. But with Pope Francis and the emphasis he's placed on local churches and the desire to have people really participate in these special events in their own diocese, I think we can expect, it's very reasonable that we can expect that will be the case.
Okay, what else can you tell us about preparations taking place in Fatima? You were just there, and there's only, what, a month to go until he's there?
Yeah, everyone's gearing up for the big day. So I was, when I was there, I talked with the bishop, I talked with the rector, the chaplain of the shrine who's organizing all the liturgies. All of them have said that this has really been a big process of preparation for the past 7 years. They've had spiritual preparation with different programs of catechesis on Our Lady's apparitions, and they've gone through practical steps. They redid the altar that's there in the shrine. It had been installed initially during one of John Paul II's visits in the 1980s and hadn't been kind of refinished since. So they redid that. They cleaned and refinished the outside of the basilica there where those shepherds are buried. So they said that at this point we're down to kind of the last minute things. They're tying up the loose ends, and people are really getting excited as the Pope's visit is getting closer.
I was involved in the visit of Pope Francis to the United States in 2015. I know how much preparation goes into that and how many people come to visit him. How many are they expecting in Fatima for his visit?
You know, we got some big numbers from the chaplain, especially, who's organizing all of the masses and the vigil on the 12th. He said we're expecting about 500,000 to 800,000 people. And with some stragglers who come, maybe not in organized groups, we could get up to 1 million people there at the shrine on that weekend.
The Pope certainly does draw a large audience. Elise Harris, Rome correspondent at Catholic News Agency, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
Coming up, what's next after the U.S. missile strike against Syria? We talk politics with the editor of The Hill. In the past week, we've witnessed a different side of President Trump. He's had to face challenges ranging from attacks in Syria to fighting among his advisors. Joining us now is Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief for The Hill. Always good to have you with us.
Hey, Lauren.
Last week, we saw President Trump take decisive action in Syria. But what happens next from a policy perspective? Are we going to go back and bomb again?
That's a great question, and that's a question a lot of members of Congress are asking. Does Congress need to approve any further action? A lot of Democrats and some Republicans say yes. I don't see Congress agreeing on this. The question, I think, really hinges on Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State's visit to Russia this week. He's saying, are you going to be aligned with us or with Iran? And that's and Syria. That's the big question. And I think this bromance between Putin and Trump could be ending.
Well, but even if he goes to Russia, even if he says to them, make a decision, they're not going to make a decision.
No, and their rhetoric has been very tough, especially over the last couple days. At first, it was muted in the wake of the video of the horrible attack, but now they're saying
they've said was used today.
Exactly,
right.
and Putin comparing this claim to the claim of weapons of mass destruction with Iraq, kind of mocking U.S. intelligence. So, I don't see this going very well. The Tillerson visit.
There were reports also of infighting at the White House, particularly between Steve Bannon and the president's chief strategist, and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law and also senior advisor. What do you think's going on there?
Well, I think there is tension, without a doubt. I mean, there have been a lot of, I think, overblown media accounts of what's going on and who's leaving and who's going to replace him. But I do think that that Kushner and Bannon had to get on the same page, and there have been a little bit sniping, it seems, behind the scenes. This is a power struggle. We've seen this at other White Houses.
Over and over again.
And Bannon was kicked off the National Security Council. I think that was more of an H.R. McMaster move because he replaced Michael Flynn as a national security advisor. But they've got to get these personality conflicts off the front page.
Do you think that the infighting was focused on how we respond to Syria?
I don't. I think it's more dealing with domestic policy and why legislation hasn't happened on the Hill. It's just their agenda on Capitol Hill got a big win with Neil Gorsuch,
right,
but not with legislation. And I think it stems from that.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think that we need to know, after Congress gets back from this Easter break, is there going to be a deal on health care? What is next legislatively?
Great question. It could
maybe they don't know.
It could be health care. It could be tax reform. Some people are saying maybe they combine it into a big bill. I think that's going to be too difficult. But I think because they want to use some of the money from Obamacare repeal, they are going to try to do both at the same time. Maybe not in the same bill, but they want to get health care done. It just could go on and on. Even if you get through the House, you got to get through the Senate.
You got to get through the Senate,
yeah,
and there's no desire, I don't think.
Majority Leader Mitch McConnell wants to move to tax reform, so maybe that's the next move.
All right. Also, coming up, we've got this in legislation. There are other areas, other than tax and health reform.
Yeah, and you have a possibility of a government shutdown. So Congress is on a 2-week recess. They come back and they've got to pass some type of government funding bill, or the government will shutter. at the end of this month. Do I think it will?
No.
But
it always comes to this.
But it's going to divide the Republican Party because the Freedom Caucus and the conservatives are not going to want to go pass a bill that Democrats support.
Okay, Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief of The Hill. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lauren.
Up next, how to keep Christ in your Holy Week and Easter celebrations. And Pope Francis visits a Catholic hospital. A message from children, not always happy to see him. Today is the feast day of St. Stanislaus, the Bishop of Krakow, who was martyred more than 900 years ago. He was the first native-born Polish saint and is the patron of Poland and Krakow. Holy Week reminds us about the challenge of keeping Christ present in our increasingly secular society. Joining us now is Dr. Chad Pecknold, professor of historical and systematic theology at the Catholic University of America. Thanks for being here today.
Great to be here.
As we're entering into Holy Week, it is so difficult sometimes for Christians to bear witness by using the symbols like the crucifix in a world where it is really pretty secular. It's hard to do that.
Well, you know, our faith is a public faith which has always spilled out into the public square. The reason why we remember martyrs both in the early church and today is because they usually die a public death. Christ died a public death. And we can't be afraid to bring our faith out into the public square, especially during Holy Week.
Let's look at some numbers. Pew Research shows a declining population, Catholic population, from 2007 to 2014. The number of Catholics dropped from 54.3 million to 50.9 million. And as we become this more secular country, and as we're losing Catholics in the U.S., how do we keep Christ the focus of Easter?
Well, we've lived a comfortable Christianity in America for so long. It's not surprising
that is so true.
It's not surprising our numbers go down. You know, if you have a lackadaisical approach to your faith because everything's comfortable, guess what? People aren't going to follow the faith. The faith actually makes demands on us. And I think, you know, one of the things that we can do is to not be a retreat people, not a people who are kind of bunkered in our intentional communities, but who are moving out. We're a pilgrim people as Catholics.
What I love on Good Friday is that so often you see processions, even here around the Capitol. And when I was in the Middle East this weekend, in Iraq, the people, they are not able to be in their churches because they were bombed.
Amazing.
And yet they came to the church site anyway with their palms and waving them. I mean, it is just, we take things so for granted here.
We do, and I think, you know, liturgy is our path through the world. It doesn't have to stay within the four walls. We can take the liturgy of this week. Passion plays were developed out of bringing the readings from Good Friday out into the public square and performing them. And we can do that today again.
What do you do for Easter with your kids?
Well, of course, we observe the Holy Week, and this Friday we'll spend Good Friday with the Dominicans at the Dominican House of Studies.
Wait a minute, what about the Easter Bunny?
And then on Sunday, after Mass, we will do an Easter egg hunt. But inside the Easter eggs will be rosaries and crosses and scripture verses about the resurrection.
Oh, that's such a great idea.
So that they can find Christ, the risen Christ, and look and associate Easter egg hunts with that. Can I steal that? You got it.
All right, it's mine now.
You got it.
All right, thank you. Dr. Chad Pecknold from the Catholic University of America.
Thanks, Lauren.
Pope Francis meets with young patients from Rome's Children's Hospital. The children range in ages from 5 to 18. They presented a card to the Holy Father, look how cute he is, thanking him for giving them hope and courage as they recover.
Entrare in un ospedale sempre fa paura.
The Pope told them going to a hospital is always a bit frightening. Then he joked about the reason many kids get scared and cry when they see him. And the Holy Father says it's because he's dressed in white and they think he's a doctor coming to give them a shot. The Pope thanked the Catholic hospital for creating a family atmosphere for the children in their care. And that does it for us for this Tuesday. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Thank you for joining us. Good night, and God bless.